For me, there are a number of messages that I want to pass across. So one of the messages is really about how you set up a business and how you set up a business to succeed, and how do you structure a business in a way that will make financial sense and somehow free yourself to focus on the bits of the business which are about scaling. So how do you structure a business to make a lot of financial sense and then focus your efforts on scaling that business, and how do you separate the structure and the scale? So that's one part of what I want to talk about. Another piece I want to talk about is really about the cultural differences between countries. And as an Indian working in a multinational company, now working in North Asia for the last 6 years, looking after China, Japan, Korea, which are very alien cultures, both for my home culture, India, and also for my company, which is a multinational, British multinational. How does one work in these markets? How does one navigate these different cultural waters? And how does one make marketing work where that's your core responsibility, but you don't really understand the people very well to begin with? The advice I would give is really in a couple of areas. One of them is about trying to map out the trends 10, 15 years in advance to see what will happen 15 years from now. And then how do you position yourself in an optimum position to have the right skills at the right time 20 years from now in a way that coincides with what you like doing. So that's really something that I wish someone had told me 20 years ago. So I would like to pass that on. Now, I would take some trends that are relevant to each person. So for example, there is a trend of the aging population. There's a trend of business and the market moving east and south. There's a trend of technology changing all the time in Moore's law, right? And all of these trends, I would encourage each person sitting in the room to apply to their business to see how it would impact 10 or 15 years from now. And therefore, what are the things they need to start doing today so that when the trend actually hits, they're fully prepared. So just to give you an example, my company's business is in healthcare. So if I was starting out 10 years ago, I would say, let's think about the aging population. 10 years from now in a country like China, today the median age in China is 35 years. In 10 years, the median age is likely to be 40, 41 years, 42 years. There's going to be a large number of people actually above the age of 50, 60. So there's going to be a big healthcare need. The second trend in China is a trend of premiumization, where people are getting a lot richer than they used to be. Okay, so now you put healthcare and premiumization together. The third trend that you can talk about is technology. The fourth trend is about smaller families. So think about China 20 years from now, where a lot of people are older, they have access to money, they need healthcare, but the families are nuclear. In the past, families were together, now they've broken apart. So there is going to be a market for taking care of senior people, and the target audience for this market may be younger people. And this may somehow get linked to technology with things like wearables and connected health. So how do you start developing technologies and ideas today that may take 5, 10 years to germinate, but at the time when this trend starts really hitting and when it's really needed, you position yourself with the right product at the right time. So that's just an example of one country and one trend. But similarly, if someone is in banking, you could also choose what are the right trends that are going to impact your target consumer 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, and start building those competencies today. Normally, we don't focus so much on doing the right things. We are more focused on doing things right. And just because companies work in certain ways and the particular way things have always been done, it just keeps getting perpetuated. People keep doing the same thing again and again. But somebody needs to take a step back and really think about what you're doing. Is it right for tomorrow? It may have been right for yesterday. And I don't think we do enough of that. I feel I know less about China than I felt I knew when I first stepped off the plane 7 years ago. So when you start in a culture like China, which is a completely alien culture for the West and also quite alien for India, you may start thinking you know a lot because you've read a lot. But unless you really immerse yourself into the culture, unless you really experience the culture, it's very, very difficult to really know the culture. And if you don't know the culture, then it's very difficult to do the right things and actually make your business work in the right context, in the right cultural context. This is something that's absolutely critical, but the only way you can get there is time, immersing yourself, and also somehow making sure you enjoy the experience. I know many people who go to a country like China and don't like it at all. And they're almost like expats in China, or they stay outside the mainstream. And it's like a, bird dipping its beak in water to drink, but then it brings its beak out and it's back in the air. But what you really need to do is become probably more like a fish and actually get into the water for a while. And then you can choose to come out if you want. But unless you've really experienced underwater, you don't really know how a fish's world is. In many ways, China and the East is as different from the West as the environment of a bird and the environment of a fish. The way to enjoy a culture is to start with a positive attitude. It's always to smile at people first. And if you smile at people, it's very likely people will smile back at you, regardless of which culture it is. And yeah, sometimes things are difficult. Sometimes, things don't work very well. Sometimes things can be very frustrating. But the important thing is to just remain cool and just enjoy the experience, both the good and the bad. Actually, when I started in China, we were on a particular path as a company, which was very much like what we do globally. So we had ambitions of building the same product portfolio, the same kind of distribution networks, the same kind of partnerships. And it was really seen as China is a part of a global organization and so has to be structured in line with a global organization and has to behave the same way. And I did spend the first 2 years of my stint in China really trying to do that. And it was very, very, very difficult. And we actually had a situation where the business was not growing at all, where we had, let's say, the profitability numbers were not very good. And until we could really step out and take a step back and see what is the right way to win in China, what is the right thing for China, till the point we did that, and till the point where the team really understood the cultural context and the fact that we needed to do something different, and till the time we were actually able to align that with the global leadership team, we never really had any progress at all. So it was extremely difficult, extremely painful to begin with, but once we had this breakthrough, once we had the realization that we need to find a different path in China, a path that works for China, it was still pretty difficult, but it was much more rewarding, fulfilling. The results and the numbers were clearly much better. And there was a lot more focus and support from the organization as well. So the big learning there was that in a multinational organization, it's not just about taking what you do in one country and cloning it everywhere else. There is a global context, there's a local reality. The local reality in general is more important than the global context. That doesn't mean the global context is not important. There are learnings to take from global. There are best practices to take. There's communication that's needed both ways. There are certain ways that brands need to look around the world. So all of those guidelines are very important, but they need to be implemented in the appropriate way that works in the local culture. And for that, you really need to think about it. The culture of my company is extremely entrepreneurial. And it's very, in a sense, if you come up with a great idea, and if you're really committed to spend the personal time and energy to implement the idea, the company gives you the space and time to actually do it, to prove it's possible. And this I know is not true in every company, because many companies have a lot of systems. In our company, I think we also have systems, but there's a balance between process and principle. And in general, principle is more important than process. My advice to people who are looking out and trying to make this call is to consider where they will create the greatest value. I was reading a very interesting book recently about exactly this dilemma, and the author there talks about that there are two things you can do. Either you can create something from 0 to 1, or you can work on scaling it from 1 to n. And when you create something from 0 to 1, you're typically creating the first thing, which means you're really inventing stuff. And when you are scaling from 1 to n, you may be taking a small business and you're making that very big. The skills you need and the fulfillment you get in both of these are quite different. And also your attitude, mentality, risk averseness is very important. When you scale from 0 to 1, and if you make a big company, you may build a lot of value. You may build billions of dollars of value at some point. But also when you scale from 1 to n as part of a larger entity, you may still build billions of value and have a smaller share, but still you may build a lot of value for yourself.